Thanks for joining this session on sustainable finance and fintech. My name is Veronica Garcia. I'm the CEO and founder of BitLumens. We work with Internet of Things and the blockchain to bring power and water to women farmers in Latin America. In this session, we will try to address to which extent we can close the gap between sustainable finance and fintech, and how can actually fintech help us in doing so. So fintech can be divided into two different categories. One of them is related to robo-advisory, mobile payments, crowdfunding, and artificial intelligence. And the other one is related to blockchain, where many applications had evolved in recent years. As many of you know, there exist two different types of applications. One of them is related to coins, and the other one is tokens. And if we sum these two up, we are talking about a market cap of $561 billion. And if we compare it to Apple, this is $900 billion, and Apple is a company that was founded in 1976. So I do believe that the pace at which blockchain applications had evolved is quite fast. One of the coins that exists out there, it's called Bitcoin. It's quite controversial because it needs around 40 terawatts of power to operate. It can only handle 14 transactions per second, way below what other payment systems can actually handle, and has a market cap, or at least until yesterday, of $235 billion. I say until yesterday because today Bitcoin is down below $10,000. So blockchain has many different advantages, but among those, I'd like to point out authenticity, immutability, security, and transparency. Many of these benefits have been studied by many countries, and in particular by the UK, where in 2015, the UK proposed a regulatory sandbox for startups to test their products, fostering innovation and competition. I still believe that there is a need for a global regulatory framework where startups can scale on a global basis. And for this, we can talk about all these issues. And let me first introduce you Richard Olsen. He is the CEO and founder of Like. To me, Richard is basically reinventing capital markets. Like, it's a global platform for all asset classes on the blockchain. Nick Beglinger, he's the co-founder and CEO of Clean21. He supervises the activities on the foundation, sets project and partnership priorities, and is the main interface with C21 Advisory and Foundation Board. He held the first hackathon linked to the climate conference in Bonn last year. And last but not least, we have Claudio Tesone. He's an assistant professor at the University of Zurich for network science, where he also serves as co-director of the University Priority Program on Social Networks. He is founding member of the University of Zurich Blockchain Center. Having said this, I would like to dive into the next question, the first question, and I would like to ask Nick and Richard to answer. You have 5 minutes. You can see the clock over there. And how does your company engage in sustainable investments? And if you can give us a few examples. So Nick, would you like to start?
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. We're not a company, we're a foundation, and we don't have enough money to engage in investments, so I need to approach your question a bit differently. I think I very much appreciate this format of an event as it tackles the world's biggest problem, and that's climate change. So when we look at this problem, we look at it with the science in our head, so I completely agree with the comment that was made before. The science is such that we need to act very, very urgently in terms of mitigating climate change and also financing the adaptations to climate change that we can no longer stop. So when we approached this subject, it becomes very obvious that it's such a huge problem, climate change, that we need to solve in such a limited amount of time that clearly technology will have to play a very important role. I say that because there is different types of technologies that people talk about right now and that have been discussed quite a lot already today. Among one is definitely distributed ledger technologies, sort of the term, the macro term on top of the blockchain. So I think it's important for everybody to note there is distributed ledger technologies, there is the blockchain and other ones, or other types of distributed ledger technology, and then one application of the blockchain is Bitcoin. That was a bit unclear this morning. When it comes to utilizing technology and when it comes to investment, I think before one dives deep into technology and the different ways that technology could mitigate climate change, I think key really is to emphasize one method, and that's the pricing carbon or pricing GHG emissions in general. Renat has before quickly touched on this. We are lucky to have Joe Stiglitz coming tomorrow. And I mention this because Joe Stiglitz and Lord Stern have together written a report that talks about carbon pricing and gives us fairly clear indications as to where carbon, as to what price carbon needs to have in order for sensible investments to happen. And I think we need to all, that would be sort of my take on for you to remember, if you may. We need to all be very, very clear that carbon needs to be priced right now at around $50 a ton minimum, and by 2030 already we're talking about a price range of approximately $100 a ton. So when you come in terms of deciding where you put your money and decide whether this is a sustainable investment or not, a very, very simple and very, very clear indicator is whether there is a price of carbon involved and whether that price on carbon is actually at the level it should be. So that's the main way of looking at it. Now, specifically, I was also give a bit of background on our activities. So I have set up the Cleantech 21 Foundation 10 years ago with the understanding that climate change is upon us and we have very little time to address it. I don't want to sound dramatic, but I think, looking at the literature that was distributed by the conference at the outset, there is still this notion that there is this traditional investment market and then there is this other green market, and I think that's one of the key things we need to sort of leave behind us. Every investment needs to be green if we want to mitigate climate change. And every investment also has an impact. That's why I don't like the term impact investment, because it looks at the impact only if you sort of think there's a positive one. If you do 5% of your money with impact investment, then the 95% also has an impact. It just may be a negative one. So the term impact investment and the term sort of traditional investment, which also has sort of a positive notion to it, that we should really leave behind. My first 7 years at the foundation, I looked at regulatory innovation. I was leading the first Swiss green business organization called Swiss Cleantech, and we have lobbied heavily for regulatory improvements in order that investors have the necessary regulatory frameworks to support their sustainable investments. Since 2 years, my focus has shifted more sort of to the international scene, where there's also an advocacy topic that we are dealing with on carbon pricing specifically. But now, as was mentioned, the focus is also on the intersection of distributed ledger technologies and climate. Reason being very simple: climate, biggest problem. DLT, one of the main innovation drivers. We bring the two together in order to address climate change. And with this, in my last second, we have organized a Hack for Climate. This is the first hackathon linked to a UN climate conference. We've done 17 workshops in global centers where distributed ledger talent is to be found: Zurich, Berlin, Shanghai, MIT, places like this. We've reached 1,300 developers, have opened an application, have received over 500 high-quality applications, have chosen the top 100 and have invited them to Bonn during the climate conference to work on very specific problems, utilizing distributed ledgers and artificial intelligence to solve climate change. I'll go into more details if it's wanted. Thanks.
So, thanks that you're still here. I have a big problem when we talk about, you know, kind of sustainability, fintech. I have a big problem when we talk about fintech, sustainability, etc., because these are all big topics. And what I find, the big problem which we have is actually to visualize complex things. So what I really think we have to do is create really beautiful end-user applications. When you can hold it in your hand, then it's suddenly real. And, I mean, we're here at a university which was built over 100 years ago, and this room is over 100 years ago. But who of us realizes that the whole business conditions, the whole concept of a political state, they have evolved with concepts which were defined over 200 years ago. So we build businesses and have markets which use an operating system literally 200 years old. Just imagine you take a Nokia mobile phone and try to, of the 80s, and try to load it with a modern app. You just cannot do it. So what is the objective of Look? First, I believe blockchain is a seminal innovation because it can do the following. As opposed when you do business, I go into your shop and just buy something without paying. Blockchain can do two things. First, digitize any asset or legal claim. Second, when we exchange a token, I give you my token, you give me yours, there is a so-called atomic swap. A close link. You give me something, I give it to you, zero uncertainty. And the other thing is, I can do that for microtransactions, a half a penny, a hundredth of a penny. Now, I argue that the economy at large is very much similar like your human body, a highly complex organism. And if we think how the organism works is, you know, you take out your biology textbook, 700 pages, you open it on one page, and then, you know, there you have these molecules. And how work the molecules? You have atoms, and atoms come together because they're electrical charges which, you know, hold them together. Sometimes they're the reverse, and they're pushed out. Other occasions, you have one electron which moves over to the other atom. In this new crypto world, I can do microtransactions. I can pay you a hundredth of a penny to do something. And you give me something in return. So what is Look about? We're building a global marketplace on blockchain and create wallets for the end user. And hopefully, like the App Store, you have wallets which are very beautiful. And in these wallets, you know, for example, what you can do? And Alan is here, he'll sell you trees, mangrove trees, in Myanmar. And what do these mangrove trees do? They, you know, kind of offset the CO2 footprint. And now just imagine, you go into Starbucks, you don't just take your Swiss francs to pay, but you could actually pay with mangrove trees, which are automatically converted into what Starbucks wants. Or actually, we can do even more extreme things. You know, a village, what is a village without a tree at the center? One beautiful tree. And what's possible is that few school kids issue their own coin, and with the funding of that coin, they look after this tree. And then you can use this kind of tree to make micropayments. So we're entering a world which is postmodern. There'll not just be one major currency which we all have to use, but each one of us, each organization can create its own currencies and use that within its business model. But now, I can only give you a tip of the iceberg of the changes which we can implement. The key is actually to realize those tools and make them really beautiful, that we start to use them, and then we understand the full potential. Okay?
Thank you very much. So the next question is directed to Professor Tessone. And could you illustrate some examples of mechanisms leading to known and unknown risks associated to blockchain? Is there any mechanism in particular on the sustainability area you would like to address?
Thank you very much. And I think that Richard's previous statement is a very good starting point on why blockchains are really interesting, also from the research point of view. But as well describes the challenges that appear because of the emergence of these new technologies. On the one hand, the example of the complexity of the human body and the metaphor of the economy works very well here, because like in the human body, here we have a set of different pieces in the system that are have their own objectives. These objectives are not always aligned, and what you want is that all the system works in an harmonic way. And this is a little bit of a challenge, and this is perhaps one of the things that have been overlooked, and this is one of the hidden challenges that appear when considering things related to blockchain. Cryptocurrencies, blockchains in particular, have some known issues when you design them. This, you see that it is a very interesting system because of the following. These are, in general, decentralized systems. I'm thinking of unpermissioned blockchains. These are decentralized systems, as I said, but that are still designed somehow top-down. Even if everything that you build later is bottom-up, the system is, at the end of the day, designed in a central fashion, even if the development is open. When you design these systems, you have a set of things that are obvious. For example, when you want to design a blockchain that is offering financial services, exchange of assets, for example, like in the example before, you have obviously the concomitant financial risks that you have just simply because you have a financial system that you are building with this thing. But you also have another issue that is prevalent in, for example, all the cryptocurrencies, that is fundamental, and is the monetary policy that is imprinted into these systems. And this is a problem that is completely overlooked in general. Bitcoin was mentioned before. Bitcoin has a very, just to induce a scarcity in the system, and also because of some other incentive schemes that were hidden in the design process, has a fixed monetary policy. The creation of new assets follows a certain rule that has direct implications on all the future development of the system. And this is more apparent when you consider, for example, ICOs, these initial coin offerings that appear now in second-generation blockchains. The strategy that is followed by which these assets are issued ultimately determine a lot of the future evolution of these systems. You have also a lot of regulatory issues that is also a known risk. Regarding the known ones, I already mentioned this. The problem is that there are a lot of hidden incentive schemes that, once again, the metaphor of the body, at the different levels of aggregation or levels of observation that you do of these systems. On the one hand, you have the problem of governance that I already talked before. But things like the reward system that you imprint into these systems, you know that, for example, when you create new blocks, the creator of the new block is rewarded with the issuing of the currency inside of Bitcoins. Even something as specific as this eventually leads to challenges in the scalability of the system, because you have you can create strategies that render the systems more fragile with respect to the creation of consensus. That is fundamental. These systems are decentralized, And it is fundamental that all the nodes connected to the network contain information they agree upon. And also the processes by which this consensus is achieved can be challenged by the way in which the individual actors behave, and this is also has been subject of study. So you have different levels of risks, but the most into account that these are complex socio-technical or techno-economic systems, and as such they have to be approached from a very broad research perspective.
Thank you, Claudio. Yeah. I would like to ask the next question to Nick and Richard. Which policy or technology barrier do you see to further align fintech and the financial portfolios towards the 2-degree target from the Paris Agreement?
I think I mentioned this before already. It's carbon pricing, in my view, that needs to be the main policy we all focus on for 2 degrees. That means for the top end of the Paris Agreement. I mentioned the prices, they need to be a lot higher than they are now. So I think from a policy point of view, that's definitely where one should focus on. If you'll allow me to briefly comment on what was said before, because I think it's very, very important that this new technology is looked at from a very critical perspective as well. But I think one should not sort of keep the overall situation developments out of perspective when doing this. I think it's fair to say when you look at the world, we're moving from central to decentral structures, and you see that everywhere. One of the most relevant, for climate relevant examples, and one of the most obvious ones is energy, where before we were all living in a world with a few central power plants, big networks in between, and most of us were just consuming energy. Because of the type of price movements that we've seen, and because of other factors, energy is changing dramatically right now, and it's going decentral. That means that we all start to produce and consume energy. And if we want to have an efficient energy system still working, it means that you can't regulate this top-down anymore, but actually you have to start regulating it bottom-up. And if you do that and you want to be efficient, it's the data that we all share, the data of my consumption, of my production, what type of battery I have, what type of heat pump type of thing that I then share into a system for others to share as well, and then for the system all together making smart decisions and being efficient. And in these type of scenarios, I think it's very, very vital that we have distributed ledgers, because we don't want one central entity to be in charge of all of our system, of all of our information. We've seen that in the sort of Google, Facebook world to what this leads, to more power and more centralization. But really what we want is a distributed ledger to which we can, on which we share information, and which basically leaves us in control of the information that we share, and then allows us to efficiently, as Richard mentioned, engage in transactions, share, buy and sell, things even if they're very small, such as 2-3 seconds of power that my battery will provide to my neighbor. So I think even though these concerns about the current state of technology, the application of it in the case of Bitcoin, centralization issues, energy issues, they're all very valid, but compared to the overall trend, I think one can wholeheartedly say that we are moving to decentralization, and that as part of that, distributed ledgers are really what we need in order to enter into a fair and also into a very efficient world.
Thank you, Nick. How about you, Richard?
I'm just somewhat more radical. The issue is the following. I mean, the challenge that we face is gigantic. And we cannot, kind of incrementally move there. We have to do a mindset shift. And it starts at 2 levels. First, mental. We have to realize our brain is inhabited with concepts out of 200 years old. So just as all the technology which today use was unimaginable 50 years ago. Literally unimaginable. So let's think in the same way, create social concepts which today no one here could imagine. And if I would tell you, you would say, Richard, you're mad. But how to achieve that? I literally do not believe in talking, because as you talk, you'll get more enemies. Because the people say, this is completely unrealistic. What does work is you just build a success. Low profile, you build something that works and inspires the people. And then when you do that, then that can spread very fast. Because there is the small world effect, that I know 50 people, each of those people know 50 people, and then in only 6 links, you reach 15 billion people. So actually, if we focus on doing things really well, not kind of, just polishing one end, but trying to do what the Americans do, is, trying to get the whole thing more or less right, and then have the courage to go out and do it. Then we can move a lot. And what I find so inspirational with this modern technology is that we can really move fast. But now, to the issues that you raise about the blockchains today, I mean, these are lousy prototypes. Literally, it's a shame. If you think Bitcoin blockchain, how much energy usage, it's just crazy. But to be able to kind of move to the next level, we have to understand these are prototypes, and we here shouldn't ourselves think about how to improve a little bit this blockchain, but there are technical experts which are work very fast. What we have to do here is a conceptual change. And I find, like Stefano, which does these interesting network research, we should create sandbox environments where we can have agents which pretend to be human beings, purely algorithmic, and do sandbox experiments of different societies evolving. Not just going and trying to map, what is the kind of network of a financial system. Because I can tell you, your data is so poor that the output which you have is also poor. But if we sit back and say, we're entering an Internet of Things concept, we can actually, when we do it right, create completely new contracts. And now I'm making a new concept, is today certain things are property. How can we make something which today is not property, turn it into a valuable asset? Because CO2 is, somewhere out there. How can we get a handle on that? This is an important debate about what is law, what is property, how do property laws emerge. But this is real research, active debate. So what I think what we have to do here is we have to kind of go to the next level of network analysis in the sense of doing our own topology sandbox experiments and see what could happen. But really develop the core tools in trying to achieve this. So thanks.
Thank you, Richard. This is a great introduction for the next question that goes towards Professor Tassone. What kind of studies, methods, and tools would you like to see developed from academic research in this area?
Thank you very much. Before answering, I would like to, that specific question, I would like to comment on my previous reply, because now it looks like I sounded much more critical than I wanted to be. Because at the end of the day, I really acknowledge, that's why I'm so fascinated about blockchain research, is because it is completely disruptive technology and not misusing the word disruptive. It is completely changing a lot of things. I also understand that the first generation of blockchains is, as you correctly point out, somehow prototypes. But they are prototypes at so many levels that give us a lot of lessons of what we have to change when designing the next generations of technologies based on them. And this is fundamental. And so what was perceived as a critical view on the technologies was more of a warning word of how we should try to approach the development of the new generations that are going to come, such that they work as we expect them. I like very much, in fact, this is one of our research areas, is sandboxing blockchain-based systems. It's so interesting at so many levels. You mentioned the economic interactions of the agents, which is a good way of looking at them. But also from a technical point of view, how do you get more scalable systems as well in the networks of peers that are connected to these decentralized ledgers? But there is also an additional level of sandboxing that cryptocurrencies give as a natural experiment. That is what I mentioned before, is the monetary policies that are used there. And in general, this is a place where the technologies developed so far has been very little creative. They just follow the original inception by Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever they were, and they just, in general, replicated the civil system, except for IOTA or others that have a slightly different policy. But there has been really little exploration in this area. And I think that this is something that is very interesting from a research point of view. There are a lot of things that can be done research-wise regarding these kind of systems. One of my interests is the economic exchanges that you observe. This is what you mentioned, this completely atomic view of all the exchanges that occur in the system is something that is fascinating, because this is something that never ever another economic system has given us as a data source, which helps us, again, to understand how people react and how to develop them in the future as well. How we treat these systems, so let's say, how do we conceive these systems? I think that this is the, how to understand these systems, sorry, is something that is fundamental for the future, because there are different layers that have to be considered at the same time when designing these systems. I fully agree that decentralization is something that is fundamental and that has to be, and it is actually key for these systems to work right. The problem is that in this first generation of blockchain-based systems, there were decisions that eventually led to the re-centralization of them, because there were wrong decisions taken at the beginning. And then these systems are caught in a crossroad where, in order to evolve further, they have to change dramatically to evolve them back into a healthy system. That's why, actually, this is going to be, I think, eventually improved by a completely new generation of systems that are developed in a different way. But because of this, I think that one fundamental thing that we have to understand is that, first of all, the incentive schemes that are placed at the different levels, but on the other hand, is not thinking only these systems as trying to be decentralized as the final goal and sole goal. Or yes, but in order to achieve that, we have to be sure that we get these systems developed in a way that they can also co-evolve together with the people that uses them. I think that this is fundamental for a future generation of systems that work for longer periods of time than the first one that we have.
Thank you, Claudio. So the next question goes to the three of you, and this is, should banks collaborate with blockchain infrastructure providers to create a more stable financial system? Nick, if you want to start.
I think Richard is most qualified for that one.
Okay, Richard, go ahead.
Naturally, they should. But will they? And will they do it with the vigor, determination, and speed which is necessary? So I argue, you know, kind of 2 years ago, I would have said, yes, there's a good chance. Today, with the huge wealth creation in the crypto space, there is no need. There's so many people who have earned a lot of money that they can afford to create the ideal financial system. We don't have to rely on the banks.
Great, thank you. Great answer. So now I want to take 2 questions from the audience. Okay, here we have an eager one. Do we have a microphone? Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, yes. So thank you. My name is Giulia Porino. I work for Finance Watch. My question is for Richard. It's a kind of provocative one. So when you said about going to Starbucks or any cafeteria and buying a coffee with mangrovias, my question is, it's not about the risk of that if it became mainstream. It's not that you put a price on nature, and basically you might put at risk also biodiversity, because basically you rank prices for natural resources, and if the mangrovia price take place, for example, became mainstream, what about cactus or eucalyptus or whatever other natural resources you might want to restore through this process? So I see the good willingness in doing it, but I'm wondering if in this system you are also considering the risk for biodiversity and also the financialization of nature. Thank you.
First, thank you that you raised the question. I mean, the risk which we're currently running is mind-boggling. There is a great example of solar coin. And solar coin has put a kind of amount of solar energy which should be produced, has said this is the maximum number, and then created an incentive scheme that people who have that get a reward. And it's working astonishingly well. Some people have made some really good money out of that. We should take it the next step. Let's build a global model of the world, including all the rare plants, and within that thing, create tokens for all these different plants. And then, because that is in this one model, we can associate relative prices. And wouldn't that be fantastic? But we can do that. That's the interesting thing. It's not impossible. Within 2 years, this could be here.
Can I jot in an answer here? Because I have a bit of a different view here. I think you raise a really valid point. We have, if we look at what we've done already, biofuels is a great example. In the past, we have, if we try to choose sort of what the winners are from a regulatory point of view, or from a, too much of a I play God point of view, then we run the risk that we have these side effects that could actually look at it, lead to a very different result. So when I'm trying to solve these problems, I try to go the different way around, and that's why I'm very much of a fan of carbon pricing or GHG prices, because that's where you sort of turn it around. You don't try to pick winners or anything. You really clearly put the finger to where the problem is, and then you let basically everybody address and find solutions to that problem. You don't, not as the government or not as some Richard, find what the solution is, but you really let it go, punish the bad, and let the good be found by the market. Please.
I want to just explain how complicated that is. Who of us is aware that the level of interest rate which we today have in the world is a market price for time? So if interest rates are 0, the market value of time is 0. So it's not just about price, but it's also in the dimension of time, is does time cost? So we have to create a very subtle financial system which can appropriately price assets, but also across time, and time is different for the different assets. So there's not one universal time, there is intrinsic time for each different asset, and it has its own different value system. So it's very complex.
Can I just say a small comment? The only thing that I would like to say is that here there is a crucial change in conception of what is the thing that eventually gives value to what is being exchanged. And in the example that you gave, I also tend to like it more simply because you have indistinguishable tones of CO2. Whereas here you have distinguishable mangrovias. And this is changes a bit the equation when you are considering how to price them.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question? Okay, there we have.
Thank you, Veronica. Just to point out something, yeah. If we're talking about social value and we're talking about mangrovia are actually crucial to regeneration of ecosystems. It's actually a plant that relaunches biodiversity, yeah. And it also helps carbon capture. So that's the value of mangrovia as opposed to, let's say, cactus or eucalyptus. So what we are looking at, I think, really is trying to price social value, yeah? Because there's a lot of things that are happening which are good for society, but which are not rewarded, and there's a lot of bad things which happen to society and which are rewarded. So somehow it's about pricing a lot of things which are currently underpriced.
Thank you. Do we have a question? I think here. Thanks, Vladimir.
Thank you so much. I really like Richard's your passion, because I was last month in China that meeting with the vice president from a state-owned bank, Chinese state-owned bank. He was fully scheduled with the startup team of blockchain. So I talked with him about green finance, but he's booked with a lot of this, also SAO, this type of topic. So it shows that even in the very old-fashioned institution in China, this state-owned, Communist Party dominant, they already have this willingness to do innovation. Actually, my question is to the big market scenario, that in US and China are the biggest currently the innovation of blockchain or fintech, and a lot of capital are chasing them. And your company is headquartered in Switzerland. And how do you overcome these difficulties? What are your strategy to be the, as you said, the mainstream, to become maybe the star in your scope? This is a question to you. And the others, I want to have a question about how to use blockchain technology to push green finance or sustainability investment in the financial center, like in Shanghai, Zurich, Tokyo, or London. Thank you.
First, a tough question. I think it's really about being successful as a business. And that, if you're in academic circles, people think, oops, you want to be successful as a business. I think it's essential. You have to have, be very strong financially. And in this moment, it means Luc has to focus on succeeding within the crypto space and utility tokens. Utility tokens will be far more important going forward than we realized. But important, become an industry strength provider. So become regulated around the world. Go through the expense and interface with the old world and file all the reports. So that's, for me, that's very important. But I think it's all feasible.
Thank you, Richard. So do we have any other questions in the audience? Otherwise, I will move into the Slido. Do you think that cryptocurrencies are shielded from the risk of bank runs? Nick, do you want to answer that?
It's a good take to address this question after so much losses in the cryptocurrency markets. And no, I don't think so in many ways. No.
Okay. Okay, great. Richard, do you want to add something to
that? Prices are as high as people want to pay, and when people want to get rid of that asset, the prices will drop. So, bank runs are part of reality. The question is of how to design a financial system where there is a minimum of bank runs. Now, an economy is a dynamic system which has to be unstable to become stable. So this is a key property of the design, but you have to design it the right way.
The next question is directed to Claudio. Will blockchain-based currencies take off only if governments accept them in the payment of taxes?
I don't think so. I think that as long as you pay taxes on the earnings that you make because of them, or they are considered as part of your assets, I don't see that this is a limitation. I think that they can still survive without any kind of government involvement. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to add something to that, Richard?
Just from a technical point of view, in future when you go and make a payment, you do it through your smartphone. And actually, the conversion will be automatic. The guy who wants to receive Swiss franc, he'll get Swiss franc from a market maker. You yourself will pay with whatever you want, be it cryptos, be it shares, whatever it is.
Yeah, I'd like to add that tax systems can be made a lot more efficient. So if you want to tax carbon, for example, working with distributed ledgers, there are very good ways of doing that. There's also ways to publish information in a supply chain such that governments can see some of that and make decisions, for example, if you tax a product at the border or something like that. So there's ways where this technology can increase transparency and reduce transaction costs and allow actors to share data that they would previously not share.
I will take one more question from Slido. Richard, it seems that your comments made quite an impact. So in the Starbucks or the Village example, what values does the blockchain really add here? Wouldn't a simple donation be more straightforward?
Blockchain, the big value is that if I have a token, I can not only give it to you, but you can give it to you, it can move around. This is the value. So blockchain enables a transportation of a valuable asset across the whole complex system, where the people don't know amongst each other. So it's a global notary service, where actually the movement of money takes on a very different form. You just get a new private key. You don't have shipping of money, and this is a kind of unlocking of the whole system.
Thanks, Richard. Please help me thank the speakers.